like for example your squat, like I referred back to earlier, you may come down to here, then any lower, you're just starting to curve through. The span of your shoulders. So if you look where your shoulders are, just outside of that is roughly where you're going to want to be. Remember, someone's got like a rope and they just can't keep pulling you from behind. Keep pulling you, keep pulling you. Keep your head down. Good.
Exercises that you wanted to go through, anyone? Welcome to this first episode.
This is our first live workshop with the Empowerment Project. We held this in a central London gym. Now we've just put together a few snippets from this day. We hope you get some value from the things in which we're covering.
You see inside the sheet there, just the first page, we are just going to go through like a few educational bits. So we've got like so different levels of training. Just maybe want to like, obviously me and Pav are always creating your programs for you, but like rather than just give you stuff, I think it's like quite helpful for you to like know why you're doing what you're doing. Because it's like, you'll be more enthusiastic to do it or probably just do it better. So we're going to talk a little bit about like different phases of training and like sort of beginner based movements up to advanced. They're technically the same, but just done in different formats depending on your current capability. So we'll go through all of that, and then if you have any questions afterwards, we'll finish up with some questions there. Then after that, then we're then going to just talk about how to like progress a program. So if you've got something, how you can progress it. Same again, me and Pavel always help you with this, but sometimes like you could do this very much last minute when you're in the gym by yourself. So if you're like, okay, like I did this last week, here's my numbers, you can naturally do that, then we can give you feedback on it. It's one of the things, it's almost like, if you know this, it's easier for you to make them adaptations. Because some weeks you'll go in the gym and you probably realize this, you just naturally feel a bit stronger immediately or whatever. So it gives you a bit of an inkling of, like, okay, can I adjust this week? So we're going to talk about different forms of progression. And then we're going to talk about common mistakes. So just things to be wary of. Then some tips. Just generalized tips, and then we'll have like a bit of a Q&A, and then go into some stuff that any questions that you guys have. If you have anything in particular about like how to use certain things or anything, we're just going to spend a bit of time just doing what you guys want to do really. And then afterwards, that's when we'll then have a little bit of a break. We'll get the floor set up, and then we're then going to go into a bit of a practical thing. So we'll put what we've spoke about into practice, and then we're going to beast you in a bit of a challenge. So you're not fully getting away with it, unfortunately, but we will get to it, okay? Right, any questions for the minute? Are we good? Happy with what's going on? Amazing, cool. Right, so I'll use, should I use you for most of the practical then?
Use me.
Yeah, cool, amazing. Right, so we'll go through like, we got here then to start with like squat, glute bridge, deadlift, chest press and pull-ups. So really just sort of think about the body in the sense it really just moves in two main planes of motion. So we've got push, pull, and then you've got the same lower body. It's going to be, here's going to be pull backwards and then basically push forwards or squat in some respects. So with like, we're going to basically filter all these movements down so you can think about very simple formats all the way up to like the more complex stuff. And to be honest with you, like, well, everybody here is going to be at a different stage of their training, just in terms of what they know, how they move, and your confidence with how to train. But you always want to make sure that you get the basics right first. So sometimes, if you're in the gym and you're a little bit unsure to what you're doing, just you can filter these movements backwards, or you could give me and Pat a bit of perspective on that, okay? So the first one is just going to be like a squat. Really simple. We have 3 different types of progressions with this. You're going to have what would just be a standard body-weighted squat. We can then move this into what would be then a dumbbell squat. So,
Goblet squat.
Yep. So a body-weighted squat, a goblet squat. The only difference here now is the weight's obviously transferred onto the front, and then we could then move this into something the likes of like a barbell back squat. So we'll come over here and just sort of demonstrate that one. So just flip your head around. So the complexity of the exercises should be pretty obvious. Body-weighted squat is, you can't really go wrong in the sense you just squat on your body weight. We're then moving that into making it more challenging by adding weight. And then the final one is obviously going to be using like a barbell to then increase the weight even more so. So you'll just get to a point where the dumbbell, it just becomes too heavy for you to hold. Like if you're holding a dumbbell that's probably 50% plus of your body weight, it's just going to be a bit challenging. And if anything, it's probably going to start to hurt your wrists more so than your quads. So it becomes a little bit pointless. So that's when you want to move into something like a barbell back squat. Now, it's a great exercise, but because it's just such a big movement, you obviously just want to be wary of your technique when completing it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but hopefully that allows you to see the progression with just that movement. Next one then would be like a glute bridge. So same again, this could just be like a body-weighted one on the floor, and this is just a great place to start.
I don't think they can see me though.
That's okay. So, body-weighted glute bridge, hopefully you can all see that. And then this would then be just moving into something simple like a dumbbell glute bridge. So a case of just adding weight to the movement by putting the weight onto the hips. Cool.
That's awful.
And then finally a barbell glute bridge. So we'll just go through these all quickly, and then we'll then sort of break them down in just in terms of technique format, just to give you a few tips to think about as well.
That is what you need though if you use it. Please don't use it without that.
Yeah, and boys, especially make sure you have a pink pad when doing your glute bridges, all right?
On the bench, on the floor.
Yeah. So either way, this could be on the bench or on the floor. The difference would be on the floor is actually going to be a little bit easier because it reduces the range of motion. On the bench, anytime when doing this, is just going to increase the range of motion. But yeah, simply enough, so there's the 3 progressions there of the movement. We'll break it down though in a little bit and talk more about the actual technique and the mechanics behind it, but it's just to see the progression, okay? So it's like when you're in the gym thinking about some things that you're doing sometimes by yourself, obviously like we're giving you exercise plans that we feel like are appropriate for you. Sometimes you may feel like just an exercise is maybe a little bit more technical than you would like, or is actually a bit easy. And I'll give you an idea of, okay, is there a way of pivoting this? The answer is always yes. Like it can always be from sort of, like I said, beginner up to advanced. So the next thing then would be a deadlift. 3 real forms of this. We will do this first of all with a kettlebell. So this is going to be the easiest version. And I'm guessing it's almost like this here. Think about the way you would just get taught in a boring health and safety thing about how to pick something up. Right, that's literally all this is. The weight's distributed in front of you. You're just using your heels to pick the weight up, keeping your head in neutral position and just push through the floor. Now the reason why this is the easiest is because we can literally just dump the weight right in the middle of your leg and just pull out from there, okay? Very similar to a trap bar deadlift, which would be the second option.
Oh, I like that one.
Now I know when me and Pavla put this in some people's programs, they're like, oh my God, this thing looks awful. It looks really overwhelming. But it's actually a very simple movement because the weight's just distributed to the side of you and you're just using your feet to pick the weight up. So it's actually a very easy version of what would be a deadlift. And then the final option here is going to be a normal deadlift with a barbell. So this here is very much like hip hinging, where the other two are more just like standing up and down. So this becomes a lot harder because you need to know how to sort of move the hips properly, where the weight's distributed to the side or right in directly in between your legs, so it's just easier. So that's like 3 logical progressions with what would be a deadlift, okay?
And then you probably want to do them with the big plates, not the small plates.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, bumper plates are always going to be better. So far we've gone through like what would be lower body push, so work in the front. We've gone them through glute bridging, so hip hinging, like glute and hamstring, and then we've also done the same again, so that's 2 movements there. The last 2 to finish them, we just want to go through upper body push-pull, okay? So the first one then is going to be a push-up, then a dumbbell chest press, then a barbell chest press. So these are all pretty much same again, the same exercise, same idea, working similar muscle groups, but the only difference obviously is just the nature of the movement. So push-ups, this I'm guessing can be done in 2 formats. Pavla's going for the difficult one to start with.
I haven't done it in ages.
Okay, showing off. Just banging out the push-ups. Yeah. So a few...
Oh, probably.
There we go. Well, that'd be... imagine if you didn't get that then, you're like a rifle, eh?
I know.
Just go straight in. So on your knees and on your toes. Obviously, the more you're upright, the more weight you're going to be putting into. So we'll go into more tips in a minute. Like we're going to go back through the top. But 2 obvious ones straight away where people tend to go wrong is positioning of hands. You always want your hands roughly just outside of the span of your shoulders. So if you look where your shoulders are, just outside of that is roughly where you're going to want to be. The next thing then is elbow positioning. So that elbow should be coming more down than it is up. So if we do the opposite, like you can see here, it's quite heavy through the shoulders, and it actually makes it harder, but for some reason a lot of people put themselves in that position initially, okay? And then the next thing is going to be hips. Now, you don't have to worry so much about this when doing it, but what a lot of people tend to do is make this naturally easier for themselves by keeping the bum high and then sort of doing push-ups from here. To be honest with you, that's actually okay, but to make it more challenging, if you put your hip forward, you're basically just pushing more of your own weight. It's really that simple, okay? So if you're doing push-ups on your toes and you're almost doing the worm, where you're coming down and then doing this, which is quite normal, just do them on your knees, because you're not necessarily doing it wrong, but you probably just don't really have the strength to do it properly on your toes at the moment. So just break that movement down. So that's like the first version. The second version then is going to be a chest press. And I mean, these 2 can work back and forth. They're both probably just as good as each other. If you're struggling to even do push-ups on your knees at the moment, then this would actually be a good go-to, because you can just reduce the weight even more so. And rather than you pushing your body weight, you're just pushing the dumbbell up instead. Okay, so very much the same movement. The reason why we get a lot of you to start with dumbbells more than barbell initially, dumbbell in some respects is probably a bit harder because you have to balance weight in each hand, where barbell is you just pushing a bar. But the good thing is with this is you can start to build up more symmetrical strength from right to left, and it's very common to have an imbalance if you haven't really been weightlifting a lot. Like even if you have been weightlifting for quite a while, it's still quite common as well. Like we always naturally use our dominant side. So it's just a good thing to do to start with to get you a bit more symmetrical, and then as you then want to get stronger, using something like a barbell will be more beneficial, especially when strength is symmetrical. Otherwise, what you may start to do when you first start training, if you keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and that dominant side is getting predominantly stronger than the less dominant, you may just injure yourself because you're not even really noticing that you're pushing more through one than compared to the other. So hopefully that makes sense. Now the last one would be the barbell. Obviously with this, you're going to want to have probably a spotter, so this is why we don't normally give it to many of you, and you would obviously do this on what would be a rack. But really the same points apply here. The good thing is with a barbell, you will just be able to load this up more than you would dumbbells. So it's like a great thing for strength loading. But yeah, the same points apply in the sense of like the hands want to be just outside the shoulder span, running the elbows in and not the elbows too high, and bring it down to roughly in line with your chest. Cool. And then the final one is going to be a pulling exercise. So we'll spin around and we'll do that one on this one over here. Hope you can do some pull-ups, babe.
Fucking hell.
So in the gym, we would obviously, well, ideally there would be a pull-up bar, but I'm guessing like maybe if you're on holiday and like you don't really get much selection inside of the hotel gyms, you could do something like this instead. Just use a cable machine. Worst case scenario, you could just pull down from one by sat on the floor, but ideally if they have a bar like this, you could use this, no different to what you would a normal lat pull down. 60, I hope you're feeling strong.
That's 60 kilos.
Nah, I don't know what it is. Well, it's quite heavy, isn't it?
Absolutely not.
What we got here? Cool, so in terms of like getting progressions towards a pull-up, this would be a good place to start. So rather than you having to pull your weight up, you're just pulling weight down. So it's a very similar movement. And coaching points of any pulling exercise, we'll talk more about this in a sec, but you want to focus more so on dragging from the elbow than you do actually pulling from the wrist. So any type of pulling motion is quite common just to pull it, and you sort of get into this like T-Rex position with your arm, and all you're doing really is just pumping the hell out your bicep, which is a lot smaller muscle in relation to your lats. So you almost want to feel like you're like a lawnmower, like you're pulling it with the elbow more so than just pull from the wrist. So I hope that sort of makes sense. So just think about that in your head when you're in the gym. It's more of that motion than it is just there. So very much the same here as well. So down,
this is how
pull.
to balance, you know.
Yeah, it's probably a bit weird on there. But it gives you an idea, similar thing. Obviously in the gym, ideally, there'll be like a proper lat pull down machine. You've probably all seen them before, right? Cool, amazing. So that's the first version. The second version then is obviously going to be an assisted pull-up. You know, keep that in there actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we can do it this way. So same again, in the gym, ideally you would have an assisted pull-up machine. No, wait there. Bring it down.
Oh.
Health and safety, babe. Jesus, come on. So ideally you would have like an assisted pull-up machine. You may have seen them before, where it's just like a pull-up bar, and then underneath there's a little plate that you just put your body into, and it will assist your weight. Now, this is the thing in the gym where the more that's on it, the easier it is. It's the only thing. Oh. Obviously, the more...
Fuck me.
Pavla's trying to kill herself behind me, you know, as we do. So basically, this thing's obviously assisting your weight, and then, you know, as you pull, the more weight that's on here, technically, the less of her weight she's pulling to make it easier, okay? And now in terms of positioning, like doing a neutral grip pull-up is going to be like actually doing an underhand grip pull-up is going to be the easiest, then neutral, second easiest, wide the hardest. So you sort of want to filter around this way, okay? And that's how it's going to become more challenging. Now once you've got to the point where you can do that, it would then be a case of doing a full pull-up. Go on, let's go, muscles. There we go.
That was hard today.
She's got one more. There we go, look at that.
What a shake.
All right, done for the day. There we go. Yeah.
That's me now.
Yeah, exactly. I know, mate. I was sweating just watching. Christ. Right, so hopefully that makes sense in terms of upper body push-pull. Gives you an idea of like easy, intermediate, advanced. So when you're doing some stuff in your training programs, obviously like the better thing to do is let us change it for you, but just be aware like there are other options sometimes if you're struggling with a certain movement or if you're finding one a bit easy or boring, like the ways of advancing it. The aim would be long term to take you all more towards the advanced exercises because you're just going to keep seeing more progress and it's easier to sort of like periodize them things. But obviously you just need to build the blocks basically. So firstly, any questions on any of that?
You're good with push-pull, like front and back, yeah?
Yeah, so just try and look at most, I mean, there are a bit more like scientific names for this, but just to keep it very simple, just think about like push, upper body, pull, and then the same lower body. Like anything really involving like pulling is going to work your glute and hamstring, and anything involved pushing through the floor is more like going to work your quads. So for example, like the leg press, you're pushing, or your body weight, you're pushing off the floor, so that's going to be more quad based, okay? So just give you a better idea of like what you're actually working. Obviously, if you're in the gym and you don't necessarily know what you're working, well, it can be a bit boring, but then you're less likely going to want to push yourself harder if you don't really know what muscles you should actually be feeling. Like the long term, you want to build a bit of a muscle-mind connection. The best way of explaining it is like if you're riding a bike to start with, you're not very confident. At some point, we want you to be able to ride a bike with no hands looking behind you. That's how you want it to be like when you're in the gym. So if you can get to that confident with it, then you'll really start to ramp up the intensity of your training, and therefore you'll just progress quicker, okay? So hopefully that will make sense. Right, moving on. The next thing then, let's talk a couple bits actually just about some of these exercises. So the squat itself, you just want to be, so in terms of positioning for this, you just want to be thinking about feet positioning, and don't squat the same way as the person next to you in the gym, because it will always be wrong, straight away. Okay, so it needs to be based on like your own limb length and how you move. And generally speaking, women obviously have a little bit wider hips than guys, so you're probably going to want to be a little bit wider with your legs to have some room to sit into. Okay, but same again, it just varies from person to person. So the first thing to do really is keep your legs roughly in line with your shoulder span and just sort of see how you move. If you're coming back and it's feeling a little bit awkward to sit into, try going a little bit wider. And for most of us, we would really benefit off of having just like little plates underneath our heels initially. So something like... So just something like this, like some 2.5 kilos. Obviously, if you're doing this at home and you don't have any more plates, you could even just put like a couple books underneath there. But I'll just get Pavlo to do a little demo. So roughly shoulder width apart is a good place to start. Then raise your back of your heels ever so slightly, and then also don't do what me and Pavlo are doing and wear gym running trainers. You want to have a good connection with the floor. So these here just have a load of sponge in them, so technically when you're pushing, especially with heavy weight, you're going to be less stable on the floor than if you just had no shoes on, or like some even like Converse would probably be amazing. But anything that's got like overly spongy, like running trainers, they're not very great for lower body training, to be honest. But anyway, by raising the heels a little bit, you're just going to get a bit more mobility in your ankle and therefore find it easier to sit into the movement, but it's also going to make you think about where like you're sort of pushing the weight. So really simple with this, just pretend to start with when you're doing it body weight, there's a chair behind you and you're just trying to sit on that chair, so you're pushing your bum back. And the same again, like I said, if it feels a bit like clunky when you're coming down, you may want to go a bit wider if you're finding it's just difficult for somewhere for you to sit your legs. Don't go too wide, as you'll then probably start to feel like it's pulling on your groin, so just getting that sweet spot with it, okay? Amazing. Right.
It's easier like this than
It is.
flat. For me, at least.
Yeah.
You can go lower.
Yeah. Straight away you'll notice that your depth increases, right? Like immediately. Then obviously the aim over time is like your ankle mobility will improve the more like you train and stuff. So ideally you can sort of remove these. But like if you need them there, you need them there. And you may have seen them before, you may have not have done. But like I used to do powerlifting, so you'll get like powerlifting shoes, and they are literally just made like that. That's how they're made. So you're constantly in that position, and it's basically promoting the same type of thing as this. So if you always need it, just use it. Even in like when you're squatting, just sort of like set your base, go underneath the rack, grab that bar, on you get, and off you go. Okay? You should find it really helps. Same again, if you've got great depth already, then don't worry about it. But that will definitely add to it. The next thing then is the glute bridge. So this is probably one of the hardest things to master. Once you can get really good at how to disconnect at the hips and you sort of got a good muscle-mind connection with that, basically any lower body exercise becomes a lot easier very quicker. But it's like one of the things that just takes the longest to sort of master. But what you want to focus on here is more, rather than just sort of like pushing the hip back and forth, is more so tilting the pelvis back and forward, if that makes sense. So sometimes before like even training, just try to think about that. Even when you're in the gym and you're warming up, just do like a few lighter glute bridges and think about tilting the pelvis rather than just pushing it. Because this then comes into the same effect of when you're doing something like an RDL, you want to focus on driving the bum backwards rather than just leaning forward. Okay, so it's a very similar movement. It's disconnecting and reconnecting.
We can try it even standing if you just basically like just squeeze.
I mean, I was going to do that, but I look like a bit of a melon. But it's probably better for you to do it. So
you can learn it like that, and then you will know how it feels when you're on the floor.
The only exercise I feel like I'm not doing right is just the deadlift. I don't know.
The deadlift?
I don't know. It's the only from now until now. It's the only one that I don't feel like I'm doing.
Once you get this, it'll become a lot easier because it's disconnecting and reconnecting at the hip. It's really challenging, and you got to think like
If you touch your pelvis, you
yeah,
can...
and the more joints are moving at once, technically the more muscles you're working, so the more there is to think about. So for example, like a bicep curl is very isolated. You have one thing to think about, and it's like trying to not swing that elbow and just bring the weight up. When you're doing a deadlift, we've basically got every single joint in your body doing something, so there's just a lot to think about. So like the complexity of the movement gets more challenging, right? But we'll get there. They were looking good, mate.
Yeah. The squat, I really nailed it straight away, but
yeah. It's a challenging one. It's difficult. Anything posterior chain's hard as well. Because even like a squat, at least you can sort of like look at yourself in the mirror, but you can't really do that with a posterior chain movement. Like I said, getting that muscle-mind connection with your hips is really difficult. So yeah, I mean, now and again, if you stood in the kitchen,
yeah, just hold,
do what Pavla's suggesting. Because the more that feels like normal to do, then the easier the movements will become. Okay.
All my kitchens are open, so I don't.
Probably not.
Don't you be doing that at work, pal. Obviously, if you're a chef, don't do it at work. Yeah. Right. Okay. Cool. So that goes through the deadlift as well. Right. The chest press. Then we sort of went through this a little minute ago, but the same applies. No different to a push-up with the chest press. So we'll just sort of use the bench here again. We'll get you on here a sec, babe. Go lighter as well, just so you don't fry your shoulder. No, go here. I'll go with these ones. So same thing is going to apply with this, is just making sure really that the elbow is in a good position. So, as I said a minute ago, we want to sort of we don't want this to be buckled in too much, so you want this to be roughly just outside of the line of your shoulder, but then keeping the elbow lower than the shoulder as well. So when you're pushing up and down, it's always in that plane of motion. If you sort of bring this in a little bit, first of all, there's a bit too much pressure going through the tricep when pushing rather than the chest. But then if this is too high here, there's also a load of pressure going through the shoulders, right? And it may look silly when she's doing that, but it's pretty much what we see in every single video to start with from everybody. So it's just a very common like misjudgment of when it comes to doing the chest press. So just sort of think about that, like the positioning of your elbow. You'll notice straight away that where the weight's distributed, it just feels different. So just think about that. And same again, when your technique is most likely going to get a little bit more questionable is as you're getting closer towards like failure, or you're just pushing yourself more. It's really normal. It's bound to happen. But like the aim really over time is to like get to failure with some of your exercises and still maintain technique. Like it's possible. It just takes sort of a bit of a minute for that to crack. And the best thing to do to start with is, rather than sometimes just adding more and more weight, is just do a few more reps than we suggest, because that will help to promote failure, and at least the weight's not as heavy, so it still keeps injury risk a bit low. Okay, and then the last one's the
leg position important for stuff like chest press.
The feet position. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, very much so. So you want to. It's a bit of a weird concept. Did I say this to you the other day? Yeah, I did. Yeah, yeah, she was first of all looking at me like I've lost the plot, and then afterwards it clicked. But you want to focus on driving through your heels when you push the weight up. So you want to think about downwards versus upwards force. So if
I used to lift the legs, remember? You used to tell me off.
So you see a lot of people in the gym either like
I'll be doing this.
Yeah, they would bring their feet off the floor.
It helps though sometimes.
Like, their legs are just all over the shot. Like why, I don't know, but it's quite common. Like a lot of people tend to do that. So what you want to focus on here is actually driving as much force through the floor possible as you push that weight up. So you've got to think the weight's coming down, you drive through the floor while pushing forward. This is giving you a really sturdy, solid base. It's like downwards versus upwards force. So just try that on some of your lifts. That's a good point, mate, actually. Really good point. Thank you.
But even with shoulder press and everything, you just always want to like push your heels.
Yeah, very much so. You just want to have a good, sturdy base. And just keep your feet roughly shoulder width apart on the floor. And that's perfect. Then finally, it's just the pulling movements, and this is what we spoke about a minute ago with the pull-up. It's really no different with anything else.
Single arm row.
So we can sort of show you on a single arm row as well. So just two ways of really doing this. You've either got that you're going to be sort of, like I said, pulling through the wrist, which is, as you can see when you do that, it's just very bicep heavy. So if you just pull from here, so it's going to be quite bicep heavy rather than sort of arching. So it's more of an arching motion. So it's only slightly different, but it will make quite a big difference in terms. So that's more arching, and then just do like the pulling one again. There, do you see the difference, yeah? So you want to think more arching rather than sort of pulling.
Someone told me once, you want to think like you're scooping an ice cream. That's what you like, that's the movement where you want to do.
Starting a lawnmower, scooping ice cream, you know, either or, same thing.
I like to scoop ice cream.
But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So just think about that. You'll sort of know when you finish like a load of back exercises, if your arms just feel pumped as shit, that they may do a little bit, but if they feel really pumped and like you can't feel anything in your back at all, then you're probably a bit too wrist heavy rather than elbow heavy, okay? So just try and make them little tweaks. Right, any questions? No?
Like, you know the bounded row?
Yeah.
How do you make sure you
Yeah.
right
So
Do they have a band here?
yeah, so it's going to be very much the same. So when you're pulling, try to focus on
there's a band.
scooping. So almost like when you're, you know what? Yeah, she's got a band.
I've got loads.
You're right. It's going to be a bit more challenging to do with that exercise just because the position you're in. But I'm guessing like if you just pull really heavy with your biceps at the moment.
Oh,
Yeah, pull heavy, quite heavy, like just pull. Yeah, perfect. So you can see it's more like coming from here, or the aim would be just to drop this elbow and hand a bit lower and scoop it back towards the hips. Do you see what I mean?
because the shoulders need to stay nice and low,
Yeah.
and just squeeze and slowly back.
And you should find you can just more so squeeze your, like almost pretend that you're trying to hold a pencil in between your scapulars as well when you come back. So you're trying to squeeze that there and come forward. You won't really be able to do that if you more pull from here because your scapulars will still be like quite winged open. Does that sort of make sense?
Are you closing your shoulder blades at the back?
Yeah.
Squeezing.
You have to squeeze it.
Yeah. I would say with a lot of exercise as well at the moment, if needs be, go a little bit lighter than you need to and just think about over squeezing the muscles that you're working as well. So like doing anything, when you're doing curls, like squeeze the hell out of it because you'll start to build a better muscle-mind connection. And I'm guessing like even from kids, everybody can do this. And if I do that, you all know what that feels like in your own head when you squeeze your arm. But if I said like squeeze your right glute, like your bum cheek, most people are like, how the hell do I do that, right? So you want to build up that muscle-mind connection where you can start to squeeze other parts of your body easier because when you're in the gym, it's easier to work them, if that makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, with a lot of exercises, if you need to, just bring it back a little bit, focus more on like slower movement, squeezing the muscle, and then sort of build it up from there. Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Don't be shy. All good? Cool.
When you were putting your heels on the little weight there,
Yeah.
does that help like your ankle not go over? You know, if you have ankles sometimes that
Yeah. So what?
that helps to strengthen your...
Not hugely. It more helps with like ankle mobility. But what I'd say if that's the case, you probably just want to wear some like sturdy shoes. Don't not wear anything. The best thing would be to do is like if your ankles are generally okay, just squat with no shoes. Or if you need to, you could even wear some like Converse or even like Converse that have like a bit of a heel on them. Do you know what I mean?
I have like flat trainers, right?
Perfect. Yeah.
And I just make it tight on my ankles.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, a lot of like gym shoes and stuff are fine. You just want ones with like not much padding in them because the more like these here, like they're made to protect my knees when I'm bouncing off the curb, basically, right? But you don't want that because if you think if I got some heavy weight on my back, it's just almost creating a little bit of instability when I'm pushing. There's like cushion in between here and the floor, and I want to have a better connection with the floor. Okay, cool. Any other questions? Good.
Does it really matter? Is it different if you put like your feet apart more for squats?
So it will do. Like squats are difficult one because it really just depends on like your anatomy. So this is why it's going to be different from person to person. So I would say generally speaking, the taller you are, probably the wider your legs need to be in some respects. But it also is going to vary based on your limb length. And also then your hip mobility, right? And some people are a lot longer from the legs and some people are longer from the torso. So it's just a big challenge. But the best thing with that would be to start off with your feet roughly shoulder width apart. And like I said, if you're sitting back into it and it feels very clunky, you're like, God, I can't get down, then the best thing would be to do is just take another like little bit of a step out. And then send Pavla a video.
She does.
But yeah, I hope that sort of makes sense. Like, really, the biggest thing to get from that is like, don't look at the person next to you and go, oh, they seem to squat well. Like, maybe I should copy that because that's just right for them, right? Like, I'm extremely stumpy at my legs, so I can literally put my legs like that and I can just squat like that. Where, like, you know, most people with longer legs won't be able to do that. So it's going to be different from person to person. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. So and I suppose another thing to think about as well is if you're getting what is called a bit of a butt wink when coming down. So the best way of doing this to start with is even you don't want to do it with any weight in your hand because really you should be having like your head in a neutral position when doing any exercises. But if you've got no weight, you could quickly just have a little look in the mirror next to you. And if you squat down, and you're getting halfway down, and you're starting to do this, you're basically getting what's called like a butt wink. So your back is pretty much starting to round through, and you're using now your back to create more mobility to get lower rather than actually be able to sit in that movement with your hips. So if that's happening quite quickly, a couple things, try going a bit wider, try pointing the toes out, and if it's still happening, just don't go past that depth, okay? So hopefully that sort of makes sense, yeah? But yeah, same again, if you are moving your head and taking your head out of like natural planes of motion, just do it with no weight, because if you've got a heavy dumbbell in your hand and you're going like this, it's going to feel like you had a really bad night's sleep, most likely. So don't do that, okay? Right, next up then, well, before we move on, any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah, go on, let's go.
What's the difference then if you've got like the goblet squat, you hold like that,
Yeah.
and I had whatever exercise,
The sumo squat.
Like that.
Sumo.
Yeah.
So it's very, very similar. It's just going to be just really how you hold that weight. And then if you're focusing more on sort of like a bit of a hip drive at the top. So I'm guessing that movement is almost a little bit in between what would be like a deadlift and a squat, where this is just a solid squat because the weight's distributed here, if that makes sense. But there's no, you could technically hold it there as well. So I know you give that out to quite like a sumo squat, right?
Works out from home.
Yeah, if anything, you could probably actually hold more weight in that position. You could compared to like the goblet squat. Like I said, you know, if let's just say for argument's sake, you weigh like, I don't know, keep the numbers easy, you weigh 100 kilos. Once you start grabbing at least 40 or 50 kilos in your hand, it's going to become a big challenge to hold any more weight than that. But if you hold it this way, you're going to be able to lift more. And then if we get a barbell on your back, it's going to be even more, right? So I'm guessing it's how you hold that weight as well.
I was thinking with crab, it's like different muscles or...
No, same thing. Yeah, very much the same thing. Yeah. So just think about, like I said, the nature of the movement. So that's obviously when you come up, you're pushing through the floor, right? So it's predominantly going to be quite quad heavy, but you will use your glute and hamstring as well.
Yeah.
So this is the thing, even with squats, like you are working pretty much most of your lower body, you're even using your core, but there'll be muscles that are like prime movers, which are the one taking the majority of the weight, and there'll be ones that are sort of like secondary, that are sort of helping along the way, if that makes sense. Cool. Anything else? Any more? We good? Amazing. So we're just going to talk about different things to think about when it comes to progressing your workout. So maybe take some notes on this because you probably will find this relatively helpful because this is something you can just like put into practice almost immediately when you're in the gym. So, you know, some weeks we may look at your program afterwards and go, oh, you know what, try these extra reps, or you know what, do this tempo for me. Like we'll suggest this once we've seen what you've done, but sometimes you can just naturally do this because like strength is a bit of a weird one in relation to things like fat loss. Like fat loss, if you do stuff now, within the next 14 to 21 days, you start to see movement. Where things like strength goes in curves and also technique. You may feel like you're stuck for a little while on a certain thing and then suddenly it just flies up. So this way you can use this to sort of help you out some weeks if that's happening there and then. So the first thing would be when it comes to like adding any form of before we even go into that, we basically look at exercises, you're just trying to chase some form of adaptation, that's it. So some element of progressive load. You want to progressively load what you're doing. And the first thing you can do that's extremely simple is just add more reps. So we see this all the time. Like, it'll say 15 reps, and you've done 15, 15, 15, and 15. And I'm like, well...
Same weight.
I'm like, well, fuck me. Like, why don't you just do 16 on one of them? Just add something on. So, yeah.
It depends, because you are making me do a lot of supersets.
Yeah.
So I know I'm doing two different exercises. I
Yeah.
know if I keep this amount of weight in repetitions, I can push the other, but I cannot push both at the same time because
that's fine. So yeah, let it drop. It's okay. So actually the aim is to actually see, is actually for something to go not so well. So it's okay to see that.
Increase every session.
Yeah.
Try to increase 2, 3, 4.
But you will get to, yeah, you will.
That's me.
Every week.
I like the numbers. If it says 10, it has to be 10.
So there's like a couple ways you can like force that. Obviously, if you like another form of progressive load is just add more weight, which is pretty obvious, right? But if you don't want to add more, I would say that's the last thing you actually want to change out of these 6. Just because to start with, if you're all trying to get really confident of how to lift, lifting more and more and more is like not the way to do it, right? You always see that person in the gym that's like got horrendous technique where you're sort of like cringing, right? So we just don't want you to be that person where you're going to hurt yourself.
Yeah, no, at the beginning.
Yeah, so the best thing to do is like you can actually get adaptation in a very similar way, but just by hitting what would be failure reps with higher reps. It's just the reason why it's generally more beneficial to aim for higher weight is because most people get bored. Like if I said to you fail at 8 to 10 reps or fail at 25 reps, you're probably going to put in less effort by the time it gets to 25 because you're a bit bored in comparison to 10. But to start with, it still makes sense for you guys to do more reps because we can do it safer. Now, you know when you're actually physically getting closer to failure because you'll just slow down in terms of the speed of the lift. So you'll know whether it's you mentally giving up or you're actually physically giving up, right? One or the other. So if you're like lifting and your speed of reps are going up the same pace from the very first to the very last rep, it's too easy, right? What should be happening is that generally speaking, when you push, it's just slowing down. And that's when you're getting closer towards mechanical failure. You don't need to go up to the point where you're shaking and it's like all falling apart, but it should just feel a little bit more challenging at the end. And where it may have flown up at the start, at the end, it may take like a second or two. If that makes sense, okay? So that's what we should be aiming for. Obviously, just start to do that with movements you're more comfortable with. Like, if you're not really comfortable with movement right now, going through the whole duration of the movement and just getting a better idea of, okay, what am I working here, what can I feel is absolutely fine. Then in a few weeks, the aim would be to start to do that. So the first one's reps, the second one's sets. Pavel loves doing this with some of your girls.
I don't do it as much anymore.
Yeah. But
I used to do like 5 sets of...
But a very simple thing would be to do here, by adding more, like obviously, so by adding more reps, you're technically increasing volume, right? So if we've got, let's say, 3 sets of push-ups, you do 15 reps each time, that's 45 reps over 3 sets. Now, obviously, the aim, one thing would be is if you just try and do one of them at 16 or 17 reps, that's now gone up to like 46, 47 reps. Or keep everything the same, but we just add a whole additional set in at the end. So you've now gone to doing 4 sets rather than 3, and the overall volume will increase anyway. So that's another way of just increasing volume. So sometimes if you're just stuck on a number and you're like, oh, this number's just not moving, if you take another like 2 minutes break, you could then easily just throw in another 10, 12 reps by doing what would be an additional set, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. The next one then would be rest times. This can work both ways. So if you're resting more, you could probably lift more. So if you're trying to strength train, this is why, like, you know, sometimes when people are getting like really strong in the gym, they may like do something for, oh, that's my GoPro. Yeah, I wonder what it was then. You may like, for example, rest for anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes. Literally pull like 5 or 6 reps and then just sit around for ages if you're trying to get extremely strong. Now, that's not necessarily many of our aim here at the moment, but let's say for argument's sake, you're only resting for like 45 seconds to a minute. If we add on an additional minute, so you're now resting for 2 minutes, you should be able to lift quite a bit more weight, right?
That's something I used to do, isn't it? I never get my rest periods, and then now I do, and I lift heavier. Like I say, that's what a lot of people say to me at the start with. They're like, oh, the minute's just way too long. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, well, you're not trying hard enough. Like, and that's the truth. Because I'll get 90 seconds in and I'm like blowing out my ass still. I'm like, geez, do I have to go again? So I wouldn't say that's necessarily the case at the moment. No, in the beginning,
you want to build confidence. But really, for most of us, anywhere between 1 to 2 minutes is you should still go back into that next set a little bit fatigued. You probably will. But to start with, what probably makes more sense is to actually rest for a little bit less, and that will create fatigue more so that way instead. Okay. So same again, whether you add more rest or less rest, that's going to differ things a little bit. Then another one is tempo. This is a great thing to be adding. So just slow the movement down. I'm guessing a lot of the time when you're training, it's like you just think fast is better, but it's actually the opposite. So if you can go a lot slower with movements, is increasing the time under tension. So we'll just put this into practice a minute. I'll get you to just do like a chest press. So if you do a normal, just like a normal rep, so to sort of come up and down, that sort of takes what, like a second maximum, just like, you know, one.
Breathe in and out, yeah.
So it takes like a second to go up and down. But if we now say like add a 4-second tempo to this, so perhaps it's going to take 4 seconds to lower the weight, then with a push, in total that's about 4 to 5 seconds to do the same movement. So if we're talking like 10 reps, 1 second per rep, you've sort of got the muscle under tension for, let's call it maximum 15, 20 seconds, right? If she's now taking 3 to 4 seconds to do a rep, you know, that muscle's under tension now potentially about a minute. So like 3 to 4 times longer just by lifting exactly the same weight. Therefore, you're going to hit fatigue and find it more challenging. And normally when you add in a tempo, you have to start lifting less straight away. So sometimes it's a great way of actually making things more difficult without doing anything. You'll find that you'll probably actually start to go down in weight and therefore just keep the injury risk a bit lower. It's like anything. If you've gone from doing nothing to something, the injury risk increases. And as the weight increases, that also goes up. So we just want to minimize that sometimes by slowing the movements down. Okay. Does that make sense? Any questions there?
Because I've got my squats with goblet squats with a 6-second down.
Yeah.
I find it really hard to go down and take 6 seconds because I feel like it's because I'm short, and I feel like there's less.
Mate,
you don't have 6 seconds to go down.
Yeah, because I'm like, there's less of me than there is of you. So
that's just me being evil.
I hear you. I mean, I have the same problem as well. It's like there's not much.
I didn't think that through, did I?
The floor's very close, basically, right? Yeah. So, a couple of things. Pablo needs to change that for you. Probably put it 4 seconds and increase the weight. So a bit of a trade-off, right? But yeah, that's probably the aim.
You're short.
So then the next one would be range of motion and technique. So this is the next thing you want to look at. So same again, to start with, you may just find naturally with some of the movements that your range is just not where it needs to be, which is fine. Like, for example, your squat, like I referred back to earlier, you may come down to here, then any lower, you're just starting to curve through. So what may make sense is that we continue to work on the actual movement, the technique, the hip mobility, keep getting you lower. Therefore, you're going to work more of the muscle area before adding anything else on at all. So that could be the aim to start with. And by you sort of just going from here and up, to all the way down and up, that's instantly going to make it more difficult, okay, without doing anything else. So range and technique is the next one. And then the final one's the obvious one, which is weight. So sometimes there is a need and a must to lift more, but it's not like, I'm guessing that's most people's version of pushing themselves in the gym is just more weight, more weight, more weight. And as you can see, I've done it in that order on purpose. There's like 5 things we can do before we increase the weight. So sometimes think about that as well. Don't always think I need to lift more every week, okay? So I would just say go very light of an exercise like this to start with, but just really get the technique on point because you'll just get more out of it. Same again, if it's more isolated, it's easier for the technique to subside a little bit. So get your elbow to the point where it's a little bit behind the shoulder, and then from there, keep it in that position, and then when you're coming up and down, the triceps are going to be under consistent tension, okay? So if anything, going a little bit lighter, you'll get more out of this because you'll be able to keep yourself in position rather than go a bit heavier, and then you're just compensating. And then hopefully you don't hit yourself in the head either. Right, so yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Then triceps, overhead tricep extension.
Just find it hard to get into that position. Quite a lot of other people will as well, which is a bit of a postural thing. So this is why like the one on the floor can actually be a little bit better because it doesn't require as much range in the shoulder. But in terms of actually completing this, if you've got the mobility to do it, this one's generally easier to complete, okay? So yeah, same again, just coming down, running it in, and then pushing overhead.
You just want to make sure your elbows are going forward and you keep them very close to your ears.
How far do you go down?
Ideally all the way.
All the way, and then you up and squeeze. Yeah, but the thing is though, it's like, you just want to keep it nice and sturdy. You breathe in.
So the aim would be for like the elbow, from the elbow to the shoulder, for nothing really to move, just to stay nice and straight. And then from the elbow to the wrist is where things do move, okay? So obviously if you go too low, then maybe you're going to start dragging yourself back, all right? So that's pretty much it.
And then RDLs.
Yeah, so this is obviously a very tough one, to be honest, but this comes back to what we said earlier. Once you can nail that hip hinge, all lower body hamstring and glute stuff just becomes easy very quickly. But to nail that takes a minute. So,
do you want to put this one away?
I mean, there's a few like things that sort of help people out with this. One of the things I would just maybe think about is like, pretend someone's got like a rope attached into your lower back and they're pulling you from behind, okay? So your aim is not to actually bring the weight forwards, your aim is to push the hips back. So the more you drive the hips back, the lower you're going to be able to drop yourself. Now, depth for this is not necessarily important either. What is more so that is the hip drive. The more you drive that hip, you'll notice that the more you're engaging your hamstrings. Technically, the more you lean forward, the more you maybe bend your back. So it doesn't necessarily mean you need to go low in order to work your hamstrings. You may find with your hamstring mobility, you literally get to your knee, and that's more than enough, and you can come up, okay? So more depth doesn't necessarily mean better. So same again, like I said a minute ago, pretend there's a bit of a rope here, pull in from behind, and then down to come up. Now obviously if you do have the mobility, do drop a bit lower, it's fine. But don't feel like you need to literally go as low as Pavla. You may just find that going down to your knee is absolutely fine if you're focusing on the hip drive. Okay? So I hope that makes sense.
Go, Vic, come try it. Because I know you said, no, don't worry, it will help others as well. Because I know you said you don't feel it. But no, like.
So yeah, the thing is as well, the hamstring and glute are the strongest muscles we got. So while you're trying to learn technique with this, you may actually find that it's actually just a bit easy. For a lot of you, you're probably going to need to lift, you know, for it to actually be beneficial, like at least half your body weight. You will. But you don't want to do that to start with, because obviously you're trying to learn. So it's just getting that idea of like, okay, I'm actually moving in the right position versus, like not all training to start with has to hurt. Okay, it doesn't have to, like, you don't have to come out there like dying as such, but it's more to just to get the movement. So let's give it a go and see how we get on. No pressure.
I know I've put you on the spot, right?
Yeah. These are good. Now just keep your head more neutral. So like look at the floor in front of you.
And bend your legs a little bit slightly.
And get a bit more spongy in the knees. Same again, if you're finding it a bit difficult to get the hips back, just get a bit more spongy here to start with.
And hips back.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good start.
But you can push back more though.
Yeah, now keep driving the hip back. So just keep pushing the bum, keep pushing it, keep pushing it, keep pushing it.
Come on.
There.
You will, but you just need to get the feel for it.
Yeah, it's fine. So just like, remember, someone's got like a rope and they just can't keep pulling you from behind. Keep pulling you, keep pulling you. Keep your head down. Good.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel like normal.
It's a hard exercise.
Yeah, but a lot of training is not going to feel normal because you're just not been putting yourself in these sort of plain emotions. And the hip hinge one is the most weirdest one.
You can bend your knees a little bit more though.
Yeah. But it will get there. It's looking good. Yeah. It's actually pretty good. The worst thing with this is when you just don't focus on the hip hinge. You just lean forward, and all you're doing is you're just basically loading up your lower back. So if anything, it's better to go not so deep to start with and just try and get the bum moving. And then as that's looking good, you can go a bit lower. That's pretty much it. Okay. Sorry? Not really, no. No, because all you're going to do is just more hip drive. The more hip drive, the better. And that's pretty much it. The more you push the bum back.
That's what you want to do.
Yeah, the more you push the bum back, the more you're going to work these. As long as you're not like sticking your bum out to the point where it's like you're arching at the lower back.
Yeah. But you can feel the pulling in.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you feel it, it's good, right?
Yeah.
You know what you're
And then when you stand up, you just push really hard through your heels, squeeze your bum.
It's basically the opposite. So it's hip hinge back and then hip hinge forward.
It's, again, the thing we showed you at the beginning.
But so there's one point on that actually is like even with like squatting or even like RDLs or anything like that, when you come back up, so when you're doing the opposite, don't do it too aggressively because it's quite easy to like hyperextend and then you're stood in this position, for example, on a squat and like look at that, that's just not great for your back, right? So it's just, you just want to come up and just go back to neutral. So you do want to hip drive, but hip drive to neutral, don't over hip drive. Because it's very common to do that and then, you know, same again, all the pressure is being put through your back more so than your legs, okay? Cool.
Any other exercises that you wanted to go through? Anyone?
No? Lunge, yeah. Okay, so yeah, the lunge is a bit of a weird one. I mean, if it's not great on your knees, then, I mean, initially it would make sense to probably just like remove it for a little moment. But we...
See, this is not me, you're listening.
But there's other ways, I mean, same again, sometimes there's a reason for that, right? So we want to maybe look at that. It's just going to be individual to each of you. It could be technique, it could be like a bit of a weakness. But you can filter these movements down. So for example, rather than a lunge, we could just simply do like a step up. So it's a very similar movement, but watered down. So there's like sort of less intensity and pressure going through the leg. But same again, doing singular legged stuff sometimes is quite important because if you're doing like a squat and you're coming back up, you're not going to know if you're pushing symmetrically through both legs. So if you do single legged stuff, you sort of have no choice, right? So an alternative to this could be like a box step up, or it could even be like a single legged leg press, right? Where you just draw the weight right back on the leg press and just focus on one leg at a time. So you make sure that the load is the same going through each leg, okay? So yeah, there you go, I'll do that instead.
And then the other one that we find raises, isn't it? Side raises.
Yes, we forgot this one. Yeah, so this is, so with the lateral raises, same again, it just comes down to most people's shoulder mobility. Like mine isn't great. For me to get into that position, it just actually feels a bit uncomfortable, right? So the obvious thing is I should probably work on it, but it's just not going to improve immediately. So the better thing to do is just slightly adapt the movement to fit. So rather than coming directly to the side here, it makes sense to be raising just slightly in front of you because it's just a bit more of a natural movement for your shoulder to sit into, but it also just take the pressure off the shoulder joint itself. Like shoulders are a bit of a funny one. They're just like quite a small muscle group, but you can tend to lift quite a lot with them, like even similar to the chest. So you just want to make sure when you're doing it, you're not really going to do anything that like angers your rotator cuff, because when that becomes a problem, it's just a bit of an ongoing thing. So just be sensible with it, and I'd say raise slightly in front, if anything, rather than directly to the side, okay? And then no different with overhead pressing as well. Rather than having the weights turn right outwards, where it requires a lot of shoulder mobility, just turn the knuckles in ever so slightly so it's more motion at the top, okay?
And then one exercise that I'll probably give quite a bit is front foot split squat. Obviously similar like a lunge, but when you do have it, do make sure you have a good balance between your feet, and it's all about driving that knee over your toe and then push back up. And
yeah, so think about a split squat, like the difference between a lunge and a split squat. Like really like a split squat is basically just a one-legged squat pretty much. So like this, the way I always explain that is like if you try to squat, you can't not allow your knees not to run over the toe, right? Because if I just kept going down, I'm just going to fall over. So they have to go over the top of the toe. So it's very much the same in a split squat. It's basically a one-legged squat. You're just pivoting up and down on that one leg. Or where a normal lunge would just be more out and up. And I can technically sit in this position without needing to push that over. Does that make sense? To be honest with you, the split squat is a horrible exercise. I fucking hate it. It's not nice. No one probably likes that one, but yeah.
Some people do.
It's a good one. It's a really good one for. It's a good one for building up like.
I like them very much.
Yeah, and it's actually good like for all rounder, for like quads, glutes, symmetrical strength. But yeah, I just
exactly that's what we like.
Bicep curls. That's the exercises. That's all we need. Right, cool. That's it. Anything else, guys? Or
any other exercises? Anything? Any questions?
Well, I was going to say for a leg press because of my body, like my body's quite large.
Yeah.
It's quite hard to get the full range of movement in my quads or anything like that. So it's. I don't.
Yeah. So just keep the range of motion limited for the minute. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen something.
Yeah, they are there. They are there.
In general, with the leg press, like just. It's a bit like an ego machine because you can just lift stupid amounts of weight on that. Most people can. Like, well, it feels good to start with. Just don't, because it's easy to like not be breathing properly, jerk your knee on the machine. The better thing to do on that, in all honesty, is more volume than anything. So more sets or more reps. Like, do put a bit of weight on there. Like, make it a bit hard, but I would focus on them things more than just slamming more and more plates on there.
Because the same as when you sit down and you sort of push yourself your weight and additional weight. It's a similar thing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's
Yeah, so it's like a leg press where you're pushing yourself away from it. Yeah, there's loads of different types of leg pressing. But yeah, I would say with all of them, just aim for more volume So either more sets, more reps, or even change up the rest periods more so than just keep adding weight. Because a lot of you will be able to lift at least your body weight on there, probably more. But it's just like if you're not breathing properly, if your technique's sometimes a bit iffy, the likelihood you injure yourself is quite high if you're lifting your body weight plus, right? So just be sensible, and that's what I'd say. It's one of the machines where you can really ramp it up in comparison to anything else.
We forgot.
Okay, and then the last thing, I promise you, last thing we are done. They're all from the seat now. You killed them. This is, you wrecked them all with a circuit.
What? No, because.
So with these are quite good as well, like grips, especially if you're starting to lift more. It'll get to the point where, like, if you're trying to, I don't know, do a deadlift and that bar is the same weight as you plus, like, as well as, like, we don't want to be using these all the time because you want to be gripping stuff in order to increase your grip strength. It's questionable, like, you know, sometimes if you're trying to lift a certain amount and work your hamstrings, it's probably better to just use straps instead. So the way these would work is you can actually get two different types. You can get figure 8 straps where they're really easy, where I just put my hand in and my hand in, which is a bit easier. But these are quite common ones. They just go like this. You just want to put them through, and then you'll know whether it's right or not when you put it through, because so this part here, it just wants to come up that part of the hand. So it will just look like that. Does that make sense?
Suits you.
Right? I know, pigs my colour, innit? So you put it like that, and then obviously the same on the other side. Like, for argument's sake, if this is going the opposite way as well, I just need to put it out and put it back in the other way, and then that's pretty much it. Now with that there, all you need to do is just put it like one layer around the dumbbell, and then same on the other side, and then just pretty much just ring the dumbbell. So just keep doing this, and it will just get tighter in your wrists. Now, surprising, it doesn't need to feel stupidly tight. Even if it's just a little bit tight, it will take the majority of it. And like, even if I just got one finger on there, it still makes a big, big difference. Okay. Obviously, if I just take my fingers off, it will drop.
You got them, huh?
But yeah, it makes a big difference when you're lifting heavier weight. I'd say it's not needed for everything, but like as you're starting to lift weight, there's a lot heavier, and it's like stopping you from holding the bar because you're trying to work like your glute or your hamstrings, which are like the strongest muscles you have. Then these can be helpful. Okay.
Yeah, good for RDLs, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
I use them for
RDLs, deadlifts, things like that.
Yeah. And then the soft pad there is somewhere, I don't know where.
What's that?
You know, my pink pad that we wanted to say.
And this one over here. So the pink pad, just use that really for glute bridging. You can use it, like you see people actually use this for, so like you use it for glute bridging when you're doing the glute bridges. I wouldn't use it for squats. You may see people put it on the bar for squats. The reason why is because it's just it's like a comfy pillow. And the thing is, you can just get used to putting the bar like in positions that it shouldn't be in. Yeah, exactly. And you also just don't really get to feel the bar on your back. So like with the bar, it should be actually slightly a bit further down your back, more so on like your traps, than it should be wrapped up around your neck. And you'll know if it's on your neck when you don't have the pad, because it will just hurt. So just making sure that the bar's in the right position. And the thing is, if the bar's really up tight around your neck and you're squatting down, like that's not a great position to be in, right? So this is why it's just better not to have this, in my opinion. I mean, look, if you've got just a very sensitive back, then fair enough, but just make sure that it's not stopping you from putting the bar in the right place.
But for hip thrust, if your gym doesn't have it, like I bought it on Amazon for £11.
Yeah, so both them and the straps are only like a tenner each. So you don't necessarily need them right now, some of you, but yeah, they're just probably the only things you do need, I guess. That's really it. But before we forget as well with this, so hopefully all of your gyms have like bumper plates. So these are 5 kilo discs. That's technically the same diameter as a 20 kilo plate. But the reason why they're this big is because it just sets the bar at the right height when you're deadlifting. So like, for example, if we had the 2.5s or even let's say the 5 kilos and you're putting them on the bar's obviously going to be a lot lower. So it means I've got to get in this hunched up position. But by using these plates, it automatically sets me sort of mid-shin height to pull. So even if you're putting more weight on the outside, try to put bumper plates on the inside to set the bar at the right height. Because even if you get like a normal 15 kilo plate, it will still be smaller than that. Does that sort of make sense? So put that on the inside, that sort of sets the bar at the right height. Your gym should even have like 2.5 to 5 kilos of these. Like they're just really thin, light discs. And then that will just set the bar nicely. Or alternatively, you need to, you can use like blocks and stuff, but it's just more hassle, which is easier to use that.
It just takes time.
And then the last thing was just about shifting heavy weight off of the thing, and then we're done.
Oh yeah.
So what I would do sometimes when you're in the gym, if you're lifting weight that's relatively heavy and you're trying to get the weight off, so if I put that on there.
That's big. That could help you with the hip thrust, what he's going to show. But that just takes time. So long.
So like if you've got a few plates on there, it can obviously be a bit of a hassle sometimes getting them off.
Yeah.
So the best thing to do is just like use a little plate like this and just roll it on top, and then you can easily just sort of get underneath and just put it off. Okay? So sometimes just do that as well, because it'll just save your lower back than trying to pull that weight off when you've got like, you know, 15, 20 kilo plates, and it may not seem like a lot, but for most of you it's third of your body weight or whatever. It's quite a lot of weight when you're just trying to rag that off the bar. Okay, I think that is it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you very much for listening to us for 3 hours.
And thanks for coming. Hopefully you got some value from it as well.
Yeah, hopefully it was all helpful.
Thank you for watching this episode.
If you'd like to see more of our content with podcasts as well as workshops in the future, then just make sure you like and subscribe to our page and also turn the bell on so you're notified when we post again.